Turbo, one of the most popular equipment units in the game, but did you actually know what kind of difference it makes on the battlefield? Not simply on the paper, but on the battlefield as well. And does it matter which turbo you use or how big of a difference is between standard turbo and Bond turbo, for example? I bet many of you guys are going to be surprised what you're about to see in today's video, where we're going to test all of this out on many different tanks in different scenarios, like simply accelerating, driving up the hill, or driving through a rough terrain. All of this should give us quite a nice overview of how much exactly turbo affects your vehicle. We try to do the tests as accurately as possible, but sometimes we ran into some issues. 5.
What? Wait this.
Go. That was all. Andy!
Andy lost connection.
Yep.
You can see.
2, 1, go. Andy, we love you. Some tanks took many tries to test out, too many tries even, but it is time to jump into the action. First tank we have Dezrng over here, and before you ask, yes, all tanks are identical. We all have 100% cruise, no skills, we have field mods maxed out, nothing picked. The only different thing on those tanks is the turbo itself. On the left side we have the new fancy experimental turbo, then Bond turbo, then bounty turbo, then standard turbo in non-mobility slot, and then the non-turbo tank. We all know the result of this acceleration over here, but just to warm things up, let's see how it goes. Oh, nice! That was perfect.
Yeah.
That was perfect. And as expected, the Bond Turbo is going to overtake Bounty and Experimental, which are basically identical, going side by side. They have the same speed boost, and of course the non-turbo tank back there is going to be left behind. But did you notice the difference between all of the turbos overall? They were kind of sticking together. Even the standard turbo in non-mobility slot was keeping up with all of us, basically. But now let's test it in a bit rougher situation. So we lined up Dezrngs once again. This time Bond Turbo is first, then Bounty Turbo, then Experimental Turbo, then Standard Turbo in non-mobility slot, and then the non-turbo tank. So let's climb the hill. Of course, nobody should climb up the hill via this route over here, but it simply gives us way better test results because we have different levels of climbs over here. And once again, look at this, how all of those turbo guys are keeping together as one pack. The difference is just so minimal actually, even between Bond Turbo, which is the first guy, and the standard turbo in non-mobility slot. This was one of the main things we wanted to test out with all of this over here. So far, the standard turbo, even in non-mobility slot, has surprised me quite a bit, how much it is able to keep up with all of the other guys. Meanwhile, the difference between the non-turbo tank was quite significant. We counted roughly 15 to 16 second gap between turbo guys and the non-turbo tank, so it equals almost like 2 shots extra if you manage to get up the hill as fast as possible via the same route, of course. We did the same test driving down the hill, and once again the turbo guys are staying in one pack and leaving the non-turbo guy behind, and the difference once again racing to the base was basically the same, 15 to 16 seconds, even going down the hill, and all the turbo guys were maxed out with the mobility, of course. So this was Dezrng, ladies and gentlemen. It makes a difference, of course, if you have a turbo on the tank or you do not have it at all, but what turbo you use on it, that surprised all of us, how little of a difference it made actually, how they were all able to stick together as one pack. We did a couple more quite generic tests, like simply reversing, as you see, or hull rotation. What the experimental turbo, of course, was always able to slap, even when a little bit late with the start, because experimental turbo also gets some tank traverse speed, and the non-turbo tank being the slowest. So this was Dezrng, but now let's jump into a little bit faster heavy tank, VZ55. In its current state actually, we tested it on the test server, so this is already the nerfed VZ55 over here. And what surprised us about this test was the non-turbo tank, look, actually keeping up with the turbo guys in a very rough ground on Lakeville in the valley, as you can see. We did the full rotation to the enemy base and now back to the previous base, to the first base. The gap is increasing, but it is not that significant as with the Dezrng, for example. So WZ-55 being a very fast heavy tank, or, you know, relatively fast heavy tank right from the get-go. The turbo is, of course, making a difference, but not that significant. We counted roughly 10 seconds, let's say 10 to 14 second difference, depending on the turbo you use. And once again, all the turbos were kind of staying together as a pack, even with the standard turbo in non-mobility slot. We also did a quick hull rotation test. This time on the left side we have the non-turbo tank, then standard turbo, bounty turbo, bond turbo, and experimental turbo on the right side. Experimental turbo takes the win, even though the non-turbo tank jump started a bit. So this was WZ-55. Once again, the difference between turbos themselves was actually quite small, but the gap between the non-turbo tank was smaller than on Dezrng, for example. And now when jumping into T110 E3, we found out that turbo, it depends of course about the start as well, how clean we could have started like all at the same time, but it felt like the bond turbo over here has a little bit more advantage over any other turbo than in the previous tanks we tested it out with. But over here, you know, the start was not perfect, but still the bond turbo did win, and we did the same climb up the hill on Malinovka. You can see that the bond turbo is kind of taking a little bit of a lead, but then when all the turbos get stuck together over here, they get a little bit boosted up, but still, you know, the bond turbo is taking the lead. And we counted the distance between the non-turbo tank and the bond turbo tank getting up the hill. For example, it was roughly 16 to 17 seconds extra time you would be able to fight up the hill if you have a turbo or not. And same case when going down the hill. We did exactly the same once again when going down the hill. Like you can see how the experimental turbo and bounty turbo are straight out sticking together, hugging each other throughout this race, simply because they have the same top speed modifier, but the standard turbo is getting a little bit left behind and the bond turbo is taking a little bit of a lead. But overall, once again, we can say that they are kind of sticking together. It maybe matters more what turbo you use on E3 than it mattered in WZ-55 or in Dezrng, but the big difference over here, of course, is between the non-turbo tank. Once again, we did the hull rotation test as well, and the results were exactly the same about the reverse speed. And here is the note that reverse speed maybe is the most important on E3, because it starts with quite a slow reverse speed already, and having a bond turbo reverse speed over the standard turbo or the non-turbo tank is actually quite significant. We ran the same series of tests on a medium tank 430U as well, the same acceleration, reverse speed, same results. Also, we did a hill climb, you know, just to see the difference, and it was roughly 10 to 13 seconds, depends which turbo you use. 10-second difference versus standard turbo, 13-ish second difference versus bond turbo. And of course, you know, we have to count in that I was starting a little bit further away as well. But we also did the rough terrain test with this. Now here we have the speed that matters, we have the engine power that matters. In the rough ground, okay, let's go, let's push. Just try to drive like where I'm going. Turn. Turn.
I was totally counting on that LtAndi is gonna drown now.
This is the roughest ground possible. And now this is the ultimate test. Coming up, the ultimate test. Andy, watch where we're going.
Okay.
Turn, follow.
My truck has been
And
damaged.
tell me how many seconds you have left, Andy. Tell me how many seconds you have left when you get out of the drowning.
4.
4, okay. Aim towards that bush.
What?
That's what she said, right?
Yep.
Oh, I'm gonna drown. I'm sorry.
We're all gonna die.
Well, this was the most accurate test ever, what nobody wanted to see, but what we noticed on 430, guys, on this tank, with all the tests we did, it mattered, I would say, the least which turbo you had. Even the standard turbo in non-mobility slot was keeping up, so if you put the standard turbo into mobility slot, you are basically keeping up with the bounty or with the bond turbo. The difference was just so minimal, so minuscule, you almost didn't even notice it. It more matters how you turn or how you move when going up the hill or when doing some tests. Like a little touch to the left, to the right affects it more than the actual turbo itself, I would say so. But finally, guys, we are going to do the ultimate test. Which turbo is the best when you want to escape in your artillery into a little oasis, let's say. And on the right side we have experimental turbo, I have the bond turbo, on the left we have bounty turbo, then standard turbo and non-turbo artillery. And you will see the test. Guys, turbo matters. If you want to drown yourself the fastest, you better get yourself bond turbo. Slap it on. Slap it on. Who is this? Ezilenter. With bounty turbo is catching up. No! My drowning alert or my drowning animation stopped. I got scammed. I'm very bad at drowning.
Oh. I think I'll get the first one. Yes!
And here we go, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our turbo test. We had two main goals, as I said at the start of the video, to see the overall difference between non-turbo tank and turbo tanks overall. We were able to see that, and also to see the difference between turbos themselves and how much it actually matters if you carry bounty turbo or bond turbo. Well, you were able to see that the difference is basically non-existent, guys. If you have bounty turbo or bond turbo, what matters more overall is how you drive up the hill, like how much you wiggle or something like that. And also the standard turbo keeping up with the big boys quite easily was also kind of surprising. So if you have the mobility slot on the top of the standard turbo, well, then you basically see no difference, guys. Hopefully this helps you out a bit. If you do not have bond turbo, then as you see, you do not have to sweat. If you have bounty, it basically does the same job. And if you have a standard turbo in the mobility slot, same story over here. I thank you so much for your time. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a thumbs up button, click down, subscribe for some more action, because we have some more beautiful tests coming.